She only came for the horses and left with something far more dangerous. The rope was already knotted wrong. I knew it the second I picked it up out of the mud, some greenhorn's half-hitch that would slip the moment a horse put real weight on it. But I retied it anyway and hung it on the post and went back inside to wait for whoever was coming. Beaumont had told me somebody was coming up from Laramie to look at the Appaloosa mare I was selling, and I didn't ask who. I didn't much care who. I needed the money, and the mare needed a better owner than I was going to be, and that was the whole arrangement. I was 3 months out of the Colorado Rockies by then. 3 months since I'd come down off that high country with nothing to show for 9 weeks of hard riding except a cracked rib and $112 that wasn't mine. I'd earned that $112. I want that said plainly. I'd tracked a man 200 miles through snow that came to the chest of my horse, through 2 passes that nobody with sense would have tried in October, and I'd brought him in alive and breathing and angry, which is harder than bringing them in the other way. But the county marshal who'd posted the notice had been replaced by an appointed man with a nephew who wanted the credit, and what I walked away with after 3 weeks of legal argument was the horse and the cracked rib and enough coin to buy feed for a month. I wasn't bitter about it. That's not quite true. I was bitter, but I'd been bitter for so long it had stopped feeling like anything particular. It was just the weather inside me. You live alone long enough, the bitter and the plain and the tired all blend into the same color, and you stop noticing any of them separately. So I sat in the shack I was renting from a man named Creighton, and I drank coffee, and I waited for whoever was coming to look at the mare. She came on a gray gelding, riding alone, no wagon, no companion. I heard the horse first, a single set of hooves on the frozen ground, even paced, not hurried, and then I saw her through the window crossing the yard. She was maybe 35, maybe a few years more, wearing a canvas duster that had been mended at both elbows and a hat that was too large for her head and had probably been a man's. She moved like someone who'd been on horseback so long she was slightly more at ease on a horse than she was on her own feet. I know that way of moving. I recognized it from the inside. I came out and she pulled up and we looked at each other for a moment and she said, "Cord Halsey." "That's right." "Nora Vane." She swung down, clean, practiced, no wasted motion, and shook my hand like she'd shake a man's. Her grip was dry and firm, and she held it about 1 second, which is the right amount. "Beaumont said you have an Appaloosa mare, 4 years old, no bad habits." 4.5. No bad habits I've found. That doesn't mean she hasn't got them. She almost smiled at that, honest. "It's faster." We went out to the corral, and she looked at the mare the way I like to see horses looked at, slow, starting at the feet, not touching until she'd walked the whole perimeter. She checked the hooves herself, running her hand down each leg first. She opened the mare's mouth and looked at the teeth without asking permission, which I appreciated. I stood back and let her work. "What happened to her near hind?" she asked. She'd found the old scar below the hock, a thin, pale line I'd have been able to miss if I'd wanted to. "Wire before I had her. It closed clean, no lameness." "I can see that." She straightened and put her hand flat on the mare's hip, and the mare stood for it without moving. That told me something. Animals know. "She's good," Nora Vane said. "She's very good." She looked at me. "What are you asking?" I told her. She said, "That's fair," and then, "You're not a breeder." "No." "What are you?" The question was plain, not rude. Just a woman who wanted to know who she was dealing with. I told her I'd done various things, that I was between work presently, which was true enough. She nodded like she was filing it away. "She bought the mare. She paid in paper money, counted out clean, and she didn't try to bargain me down, which I hadn't expected and which I thought about afterward. Most people bargain out of habit even when the price is fair. She just paid it and started saddling the mare. "You going far?" I asked. "North Fork of the Powder," she said. "I have a place there, small herd, mostly horses." "That's 3 days' ride." 2.5 the way I ride. I almost laughed. I hadn't almost laughed in some time. I watched her ride out leading the mare on a loose line, and I went back inside, and I sat down, and the $112 I'd just gained sat on the table in front of me, and I thought about what I was going to do next. I didn't have a clean answer. She came back 4 days later. I was splitting wood when I heard the horse and turned, and it was the gray gelding, and it was Nora Vane, and she looked exactly the same except there was dried blood on her duster sleeve. Not a fresh wound. Old blood, gone brown. She'd been wearing that duster since she bled. I put down the axe. "I need a hand," she said. "Paid work if you want it. Real work, horses, some building, some fence." I looked at the dried blood. "That's from before," she said, without explaining before. "How long As long as it takes. I can't name a number. The work is what it is." I said I'd come. I don't know exactly why I said it as fast as I did. Partly it was that I had nothing else on the other side of the decision. Partly it was the way she'd bought the mare, clean, no games. Partly it was something I wasn't going to look at directly yet. I packed in 40 minutes. I've packed in less. The place on the North Fork of the Powder was 37 acres, most of it pasture, a creek running along the east edge that would be unreliable in a dry summer. The house was log, tight-built, older than it looked from a distance. There was a barn that needed a new roof on the south-facing side, and a corral that was solid except for one post that had heaved with the frost. She had 11 horses, the Appaloosa mare I'd sold her, plus 10 others, a mix of working stock and a couple of animals she was clearly keeping for reasons that had nothing to do with profit. One was a spavined old bay gelding who I never saw do a day's work, but who she put a halter on every evening and walked to the creek and back like a ritual. The hired man who'd been working for her had left the previous month. She didn't say why he'd left, and I didn't ask. There was a small bunkhouse behind the barn, and that was mine. It was cold at night, but the roof didn't leak. She worked the way I worked, early, quiet, without a lot of conversation until the work was done. We'd get through the morning chores, and then we'd eat at her table, and she'd tell me what needed doing, and I'd go do it. She was never unclear about what she wanted, and she never told me twice, which made it easy. Some bosses don't understand that the worst thing you can do to a working man is be vague about what you need. She understood it. The blood on the sleeve had come from somewhere she didn't talk about, and I left it alone. The cracked rib had healed mostly. Sometimes when I swung the axe a certain way it caught, and I'd stop a second and breathe through it, and I thought she probably noticed, but she didn't say anything. That was the right call. I didn't want sympathy about a rib. What I had that was worse than the rib, I hadn't told anyone. I wasn't going to. It was the 5th week when she found me. I'd been up since 2 in the morning, couldn't say why. Just one of those nights where sleep is a country you can't find the border of. And I'd gone out to the barn because the cold was less bad when there were animals nearby. And I'd sat down in the straw against the bay gelding's stall, and I hadn't moved. That's the plain fact of it. I sat down and I didn't move. I wasn't doing anything in particular. I was just sitting there in the dark with my back against the boards, and I had the old Remington across my knees the way I always carried it at night, and I was sitting there and I wasn't thinking about anything specific. I was thinking about a lot of specific things, and none of them at the same time. My wife Alina, who had been gone 9 years now. The man I'd tracked through the snow, and what his face looked like when I brought him in and he started crying. The ranch in New Mexico that had been mine for 6 years before I lost it. The way a particular morning in the high Rockies had looked October. The snow new, everything silent, and how I'd thought standing in it that it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and how that thought had been followed almost immediately by the thought that there was no one I could tell. There are men who would understand what I mean by that and men who wouldn't, and I'm not going to explain it to the ones who wouldn't. I heard her come down the ladder from the loft, and I didn't move. She came around the corner of the stall, and she stopped when she saw me. And then she sat down in the straw about 3 feet away, and she didn't say anything. I sat there, she sat there. After a while she said, "You've been doing this for a few nights." It wasn't a question. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "I know." She pulled her knees up and put her chin on them. She was wearing a heavy wool shirt and her hair was loose, and she looked like someone who decided to just be wherever she was without any performance about it. "I had a husband," she said. "He died 4 years ago. Horse rolled on him crossing a creek in flood. After that, I had a year where I couldn't be inside at night. I'd come out here and sit with the horses, and that's how I got through the nights." She stopped there. She didn't round it out, didn't tell me that she'd recovered, and it got better, and so would I. She just put the fact down between us. "I'm all right," I said. She looked at me. In the dark of the barn, her face was mostly shadow, but her eyes were clear, and she looked at me for long enough that I felt it in my chest. "You don't have to be all right," she said. "Not tonight, not in front of me." Something happened in me then that I don't have a clean word for, like something that had been braced for a long time let go a little. Just a fraction. just enough that I felt the weight of the bracing, which I hadn't felt before because it had been constant. I said I lost a ranch, New Mexico, about 6 years back. I'd had it 6 years before that. My wife and I built it. She died, fever, in the second year, and then I had 4 more years of it alone. And then I lost it to a debt I should have been able to pay but couldn't, and I've been moving around since. She didn't say anything. I got tired, I said. That's the thing, I know men are supposed to get up and build again. I've gotten up a number of times, but somewhere up in those mountains last fall I got tired of getting up. Nora Vane put her hand on my forearm, not squeezing, not patting, just her hand there, present, warm through the wool of my sleeve. The bay gelding in the stall behind us shifted his weight and blew through his nose and stamped once and went still again. I know about that kind of tired, she said. We sat there for a while longer. She didn't take her hand away, and I didn't move my arm. Outside, the wind had come up and was working at the loose boards on the south face of the barn roof, and the sound it made was the sound of a place that needed work and was going to get it. Not a ruined sound, just an unfinished one. In the morning, she made coffee and put it in front of me and sat across the table with her own cup, and she looked at me and said, I want to say something, and I'd like you to hear it out before you say anything. I said, all right. I need someone who knows horses and knows the work and is honest about what they know and don't know. That's hard to find, harder than people think. You're that. She held her cup in both hands. But I think you also need a place, not a job, a place. Somewhere that doesn't change out from under you. I think you've been without that long enough that you've almost stopped wanting it because wanting it costs too much. She wasn't wrong. I'm not offering you anything you haven't earned, and that isn't fair, she said. This place needs more than I can run alone. What I'm saying is that if you wanted to make it a permanent arrangement, a real one, not hired labor, I think we could work out what that means. I think you could have a stake here. I looked at my coffee. You don't have to answer today, she said. I know. And you don't have to answer the way I've framed it, if you want to work the season and move on. I don't want to move on, I said. She went quiet. I've been moving on for 6 years, I said. I'm done with it. I looked up at her. She was watching me with a steadiness that I hadn't seen from many people, a willingness to hold the moment without flinching. What you're talking about, a real arrangement, what does that mean to you? She thought about it. She wasn't the kind of woman who answered a direct question with something soft. It means this is yours too, she said. The work, the risk, the future of it. It means you've got a reason to come back to this table every morning. I thought about Alina. I thought about the ranch in New Mexico, the way the morning light had come through the kitchen window and hit the floor in a rectangle, and how that rectangle had moved across the floor as the day got going. I thought about how I'd worked 9 years to get back to something, and had been getting back to the wrong thing all along, which is to say I'd been trying to rebuild the structure instead of finding the feeling. All right, I said. She nodded, no fanfare, no tears. She picked up her cup and drank her coffee, and then she said, I need you to look at that heaved post today before the ground softens any more. And I said I would. We didn't move fast. That's the truth, and I want to say it plainly, because I think sometimes men get embarrassed about things going slowly and feel like they need to explain it or excuse it. There's nothing to excuse. We were both people who'd been hurt in specific ways that made us careful, and careful is the right thing to be when something matters. What happened between us happened in the mornings, mostly. The way she put her coffee down in the same place every day, just to the left of the sugar. The way she handed me the bridle without being asked when my hands were full. A look across the corral in the late afternoon, when a foal we'd been watching got to its feet for the first time and ran its first wobbly yards, and she turned to me and laughed. A full laugh, unguarded, the kind of laugh a person lets out when they've forgotten to hold back. And I felt that laugh in the same place in my chest where her hand had been that night in the barn. The first time I touched her face was in June, in the barn, after a storm that had come up fast from the southwest and brought hail the size of your thumbnail and driven 2 horses through the corral fence and sent Nora and me running through the yard in the rain to get them back before they cleared the north pasture. We got them back. We came into the barn soaked and blowing and laughing a little at ourselves. And I turned to say something to her, and she had mud on her cheek, her left cheek, a long smear of it. And without thinking about it, I put my thumb against her cheekbone and wiped it away, and she went very still, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and the distance between us was not very great. "Cord," she said. "I know," I said. She put her hand against my chest, not pushing, just placing it there, and I felt the weight of it through my wet shirt, and she said, "I'm glad you came back with me." I didn't answer that for a minute. I was thinking about the exact specificity of those words, not glad you came. Glad you came back with me. She hadn't had to say it that way. She'd chosen to. "Me too," I said. She reached up and took my face in both her hands. Her palms were rough from the work, rope calloused, and they were warm despite the wet, and she just held my face that way for a moment, looking at me. Not as an assessment, as a statement, like she was saying, "I see this, I see you. I am not looking past you or through you or at some idea of you. I see exactly you, and I am still here." 9 years is a long time to go without anyone looking at you that way. I covered her hands with mine and held them against my face, and we stood in the barn while the rain finished itself on the roof above us. There are things that happened that summer that I'll skip over, not because they're private, though some of them are, but because the shape of things doesn't always need every piece of it laid out. What I'll say is this: the south barn roof got fixed. The heaved post got reset and the fence line got run out another 40 yards into the east pasture, and we added 8 horses by August, good stock, working age. I didn't send any money out of the territory that fall. I had nowhere to send it to. I had nowhere I was trying to get back to. Nora's sister came out in September from St. Louis, and she looked at me across the supper table like she was solving a problem, and then she looked at Nora and didn't say anything, which is the right response to something that is plainly working well and needs no comment. I fixed the rope on the post in the North Corral one evening in October. Someone had half-hitched it again. Probably the hand we'd hired for the summer who had gone home to his family in Cheyenne. And as I was standing there coiling the rest of it, Nora came up beside me and leaned on the post and looked out at the Appaloosa mare, who was in the far corner of the pasture, her back to the wind, ears at rest. "She looks good," Nora said. "She does. You were right about the habits. She doesn't have any." "Still might," I said. "We just haven't found them." "I think that's true of most things." She was quiet for a moment. The sky to the west had gone the color of cold iron, the day going out on a low note, and the cold had a specific taste to it that cold only has in October at elevation, like metal and old grass. "Cord." "Yeah." She looked at me sideways. The hat that was too large for her head had been replaced in July with a better one that fit, but she still tilted it the same way she'd tilted the old one, which is a thing you can't tell a person about. The way a habit becomes something else entirely when it belongs to someone you know well. "I was pretty close to done," she said, "before you came." I didn't say anything. I don't mean anything dark by that. I just mean I was close to done trying. The place was getting too big for me, and I was losing ground every week, and I'd put a lot of pride in it for a long time, and I was almost out of pride. She pulled a piece of bark off the fence post and rolled it between her fingers. "I told myself I was coming down to buy a horse, but I think I was also just looking to see if there was something that was still worth reaching for." The bay gelding came in from the pasture on his own, moving slow old joints, heading for his stall. He went past us without stopping. "You reached for a horse," I said. "I reached for a horse." And then I took a second look at the man selling it. I put my arm around her, and she leaned into me, and the cold came in around us both, and I felt her warmth against my side, and the specific weight of her, the particular way she fit there. Not the way a woman fits when a man is performing the action of holding someone. The way a person fits when they belong to the same life as you. We stood there until the last of the light was gone, and then we went inside. The coffee was already on. I don't know why that's the detail that stays with me most. Of all of it, the barn in the rain, the night in the dark with the horses, the long days of the summer, all of it, the thing I keep coming back to is coming through that door into the warm and the smell of the coffee already made and set on the back of the stove, and understanding that somebody had done that for me. Just done it, the way you do things for someone whose habits you've learned because they're yours now. Like it was already always going to be that way. Like I'd come in from a very long way off. And I had, that's the plain truth of it. I had.